Our first reading this morning is from Isaiah, the 45th chapter. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and strip kings of their robes, to open doors before him, and the gates shall not be closed. I will go before you and level the rocks. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and riches hidden in secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who called you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, I call you by your name. I surname you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Beside me there is no God. I arm you, though you do not know me, so that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is no one besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make weal and create woe. I am the Lord, do all these things. The word of the Lord.
So many of you know that I recently spent 9 days traipsing along the Appalachian Trail. It was just me, a backpack, and a friend. So off into the wilds to see what we could see and find what we could find. It's a fairly long and uninteresting story of why I needed to lose myself in the quiet hush of the world, but Isaiah captures it beautifully when he relays God's promise to us, and he says, I will give you the treasures of darkness and riches hidden in secret places. Something about that rings true in the depths of my bones. And I want to know what those treasures and riches are that await. Now, truth be told, I didn't go on this for some deep spiritual quest. Isaiah's words only capture my desire and my experience in hindsight. I went because I am obstinate and I'm a dreamer, which aren't two characteristics that God typically puts together in DNA, but we'll just go with it. That's how I am. The short version is I went because I can easily feel confined and suffocated. I went because I have this compulsion to prove to myself that I am strong and I can face anything. I went because there's this enormous space beyond my normal life that holds so much adventure. And I went because I dreamed of it since I was a 21-year-old Girl Scout camp counselor. So one day, the obstinate dreamer said to her very practical husband, you know, I've always wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail, during which he looked at me like I had 8 heads, but lovingly said, I'm sure we can figure out a way for you to do it in sections and not by yourself. And so that's the short version of how I ended up on the AT, which isn't exactly the point of the sermon. The point of the sermon is this. It's really, really dark in the woods at night. Seriously, that is the whole point of the message today. And I'm sure it's not a surprise to any of you out there that darkness falls and light fades every single day. This is as normal as the law of gravity. However, lying outside in a sleeping bag, as the heaviness of night descends upon you, it makes you hyper-attuned to the surroundings and all of your vulnerabilities. Trees and clouds seem to shape-shift into the unknown, and the sounds of acorns and leaves become sneaky footsteps instead of just a squirrel disturbing the quiet. I did have one scary experience in the dark while hiking. Nothing that scarred me for life, and in reality there was no threat, only perceived threat, because of the cover of night, which got me to thinking about darkness. It seems universally agreed upon that darkness is dangerous. As we get older, the things that go bump in the night are different than when we are children, and the specifics vary from person to person. However, typically when we speak of darkness, we liken it to anything that we are afraid of, or strips us of power. It is also true, and this isn't my own brilliant thought, so I need to give proper attribution to theologian Barbara Brown Taylor. It's also true that Christianity doesn't usually have anything good to say about darkness, right? In religion, we use darkness as a synonym for all things bad. Sin, death, evil, the devil, just to name a few. So if you're paying attention, Isaiah's proclamation from God in verse 7 is nothing short of bewildering. God says, I form light and create darkness. Okay, so there are a lot of directions I could go with this, but let's start how. This is an interesting departure from the Genesis account, which many of us are familiar with, right? In Genesis 1, it states, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. The primary difference between the two accounts is that in Isaiah, God creates light and darkness. In Genesis, darkness is assumed to exist in the formless void of nothingness, and God only creates light. So why does God switch things up in Isaiah's declaration? Why would God create darkness? This seems so contrary to the sunny, good, beautiful, glorious God that we know and love. But if Isaiah is right, then creating darkness is only in contrast to God's character if we adhere to our notion that night and day and dark and light are somehow pitted against one another. What if they live in balance? What if dark holds just as much promise and beauty and security as the light? I mean, that would change things up. So in order to explore this concept, we have to stop thinking about the word dark. We have to stop associating the word dark with bad things and make the leap that we might find friendliness with the dark. Because I'm not saying that God creates bad things. I am saying that God promises gifts and treasures in the dark that are not visible in the light. So I often feel like this is my initial sort of springboard question in sermons, but I'm going to ask it again. Why does this matter? To take it a step further, why does it matter if God is intimately involved with darkness? Well, that night that I was scared to death in my sleeping bag, I didn't exactly know what I was afraid of. I only knew that there was something out there, and that God knows I wasn't going to ask who or what it was. And so I laid there quietly, breathing and praying for the dawn to break. And then my friend slapped me on my shoulder. I think she was going for like a gentle tap, but we couldn't see 6 inches in front of our faces, so she sort of walloped me. And I thought that she had rolled over in her sleep and was confused about who was lying next to her in the shelter. And so I said, "It's just me," which was followed by her whispering, "Do you hear that?" Yeah. So I'm gripping my headlamp tightly, because then it becomes a weapon to ward off the dark, somehow making it feel safer, although it's not actually any safer. Knowing we couldn't yell or turn on a light lest the threat be raised, we made plans and alternatives to our plans and worst case scenarios, all in these hushed whispers while lying there looking at the ceiling of the shelter. Because those are the only strategies we knew to deal with darkness. And all the things that we usually do, light or yell, were completely unavailable to us. Anyway, what happened there in the dark as we lie there, knowing that we had no choice rather than to just deal with the dark, was a new closeness and bond that was not needed during the day. The light requires very little intimacy because everything seems known, or at least knowable. However, the dark requires a kind of dependence, which is not needed in the light. Encountering the dark requires a naked trust that demands one's full presence to themselves and whoever else happens to be lying there in the dark with them, be it a friend or God. As contrary as it sounds, we see things in the dark that we do not see in the light. Jen, the woman with whom I was hiking, up until that point was my running buddy and a friend. But in the dark, I knew her as a partner, as a planner, as someone who cared about our safety and our lives, as someone who was willing to face danger with me. And she also wasn't just a super strong marathon runner that I wanted to be like. Lying in the dark, she was as vulnerable as I was. It's a weird gift. Maybe even a gift that I don't want, but maybe one that I need. In the darkness, we are much more apt to pray for someone to cling to and assure us that we are not alone and that they will stay near to us and help us find our way. And we are much more willing in the dark to receive them. That night, our shared humanity and need for one another was evident. Now, most of our life, right, is not spent huddled in a sleeping bag in the middle of nowhere. That type of darkness I can choose to avoid. But the darkness I cannot escape is the darkness that lives inside my own heart. All those things that I am afraid to look at too closely because they might ravage me. Or all those things that I keep quarantined lest they make me look weak. All those things that never see the light of day because I might appear unacceptable in the eyes of the world. But the gift of God knowing and even creating darkness is that all those things that I think are bad and unacceptable really aren't. What if they are places to explore and learn more about myself and about God? I mean, when we run from darkness, how much do we really know about what we're running from? Isn't it possible that we're running from God? Well, you know what Jen and I were so afraid of that night? 2 other hikers, just like us, looking for adventure and challenge, and probably finding themselves and facing their own darknesses along the way. Now, I will tell you that it was 2 men who encountered camp in a way they should not have, like sneaking around with headlamps and everything. So I did give them a stern, you scared us half to death in the morning. But that's probably a whole different story about how it is to be female in the middle of the woods, and probably falls under the whole #MeToo campaign. However, it highlights the truth that encountering darkness can feel dangerous, and sometimes may even be dangerous. There are very good reasons our hairs on our necks stand on end and our systems go on full alert when we feel afraid. However, our suffering and fears are born out of our resistance to find out of what is really out there, not what's actually out there. And maybe more precisely, our suffering is often born out of our fear of finding out what's really in here. And I think that that's a spiritual truth for all of us, that somehow being courageous enough to encounter darkness ends up alleviating our own personal suffering, and therefore the brokenheartedness of the world. Because there's a close relationship between my own darkness and your own darkness and the darkness of the world. I believe Isaiah when he says there are treasures hidden in the darkness. I have learned things in the dark I could never have learned in the light. Things that have saved my life over and over again. Hiking the AT just reminded me that I need God more than I care to admit. Well, I like neatly tied up sermons. I like resolutions. I like to reach a conclusion and say amen, as in there you have it, your tidbit for the day. Unfortunately, what I said at the beginning is the whole truth I have for you today. It is really, really dark in the woods. The only truth I can offer is be curious. Be curious about your own darkness. Be curious about the hidden places of the world. Be curious about the hush of the night and what it reveals to you. So good news is that the boldest place we need to explore is not very far away. No backpack is needed, and a trail guide already knows the way. And the promise remains that in God, the night is as bright as the day.